and it should be recording.
Are we on YouTube?
I think, and we're at a slight disadvantage.
Wow, because they can see us.
But we
We
can't
can't
see
see
them.
them. Anyway, well, Happy New Year.
Yes.
Welcome to the course. This is Professor Cutler,
And this is Dean Paschal.
and we're here to talk about
The law.
and Bubba. You know I like Bubba.
Yes, you do.
Yes.
But before we start talking about Bubba, I think it would help if we show the students or talk to the students about what we're looking for as we introduce them to the sources of law. One of the things that I
You know,
think.
yeah.
Go
Let's say
ahead.
sources of law. We're talking about, well, where do people get rights from?
Yeah, where did they get the
If you're going
rights?
to go into court and you say, or if you want to get in the Bubba store, you say, listen, I have the right to get in the store. We want to know, well, where does that right come from? Where's the
Right.
source of the law? The source of your right? Where's yeah?
Right, because it certainly doesn't fall out of the sky, or if someone is speeding and they get stopped, you don't have the right to speed down the highway, and so how do you know that you don't have that right? What are your rights? And so you're absolutely right. Where do you get your rights? What thing gives you the right? And the things that we want the students to take a look at are federal and state constitutions. I think we want them to take a look at laws that are created by agencies like the FDA, the FAA, that creates a no-fly zone. And then we want them to take a look at what we call statutes, laws that are made by both states, the federal laws, and even smaller
Oh, it's just
jurisdictions,
municipalities
counties and
stuff. Yeah.
cities and other municipalities, right? And then in addition to that, case law, or more frequently referred to as common law. And
Yeah, I
so,
know the idea of precedent and stuff like that. The
yes,
idea that
yeah,
you know there are many new cases that come up under particular types of law, and you want to look to see how cases similar to those have been decided, so you can
hmm
decide this case and the law can be consistent.
right. And I think in this case, one of the things on this fact pattern, one of the things that we want the students to take a look at is what body or bodies of law are applicable. It doesn't mean that an aggrieved person is going to win, but at least to
That's
identify the
some
laws that are
places
applicable.
start right.
Yes, yes.
Well, a lot of people started with a very rational place to start in the Bubba case, the United States Constitution.
Yes.
I know that the Constitution gives all citizens of the country certain rights in certain situations, and the issue is, does the Constitution apply and provide rights to the aggrieved parties in this case? The Constitution was created back in 1700s.
1700s.
Yeah, so back in the 1700s, do you think that a person of color would have the right to go into Bubba, a white man's store?
Probably not.
Probably, I don't think so.
They were just
No.
property.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's so. The idea is that if these rights come from the Constitution, it must be from some amendments to the Constitution, because certainly it wasn't in the original document. So take a look at the Constitution. It's really interesting. The Constitution, gives us it's very well done, and it's if you look through the amendments, you see it's a history about how the country has really changed. So if you look through, you go all the way up to the 14th Amendment, passed in 1864, 65,
hmm
after the Civil War, and that amendment is very important. So let's take a close look at it. Read it a few times and then think about it. Does this amendment apply to Bubba? Does this amendment restrict Bubba from keeping people out of his store based on race? And the answer is no, it doesn't. And the reason it doesn't, because the amendment says no state shall discriminate based on race. Bubba is not a state. Bubba is a private citizen. So the 14th Amendment does not apply to private citizens, it only applies to state and federal governments. Therefore, Bubba can do what he wants to. The 14th Amendment here doesn't prevent him from doing it. Now, there might be other places to look. We talked about not only looking at the United States Constitution, we looked at federal statutes, we look at state statutes. We'll just keep looking until we find something that might also apply.
So, Dane, if I can interject, I think one of the things that's important for the students to recognize at this point is they've identified the law that's applicable here, but when they analyze and apply and they merge the facts in the law, they realize that this is the law that's applicable, but the result still doesn't make
Yeah.
that
Right.
aggrieved person a winner.
Right. So, important thing to take out of the course. First thing is the United States Constitution only applies to the state and federal governments, not to private citizens. So, therefore, in this case, Uh, you don't have any rights against Bubba under the 14th Amendment. Okay, where else do you look? Okay, we talked about federal statutes. And the idea is that, there are acts passed by Congress, signed by the president, enacted into law that apply to whoever the law says it applies to. Okay, so 1964, a very important act was passed, 1964 Civil Rights Act. It was important because it was the first legislation since the Civil War to give black citizens rights. And it also, as you know, was signed by Lyndon Baines Johnson. It also changed the entire political structure of the country because after that, the Republican Party became the majority party in the South as a response to what this Democratic president had done. 64 Civil Rights Act, take a look at it and go to Title II, which talks about public accommodations.
Right.
So the first issue is going to be, is Bubba's store a public accommodation? And common sense might tell you, well, yeah, it's a store, so of course it's a public accommodation. But then you take a very close look at the act, and public accommodations are defined as restaurants, hotels, uh, and more importantly, the act specifically exempts
Right.
certain things from being a public accommodation, just so you won't be confused. Okay, it exempts hospitals. A hospital is not a public accommodation. It also exempts retail stores. This store that Bubba owns is a retail store. It is exempt under the act, therefore the act does not apply to it.
Right.
So, well, why would they exempt hospitals and retail stores in passing a Civil Rights Act?
Much like they do in passing laws today, it's always a give and take. They have to compromise so that the law will pass.
Yeah. So if those things, if I'm the president, I'm trying to get the vote of a Southern senator. The senator's going to say, well, I might vote for this, but what do you give me in return? Well, let's take this out of the act. So yes, without the exemptions, there is no act,
Right.
and that's why it is the way it is. What else might we look for? We'll continue to look at federal legislation. Another important act was passed in 1866 after the Civil War. What was that time period after the Civil War called?
The Reconstruction.
Yes,
The
Reconstruction.
era.
And we know Reconstruction era was a limited amount of time where black citizens had the right to vote. They were elected to Congress, uh, sort of like the way it is now, right? But after Reconstruction, there was a time period called
The Jim Crow era.
yes,
Yes.
and separate but equal, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But my question to you is, why did this Reconstruction period, when, why, how did it end? And why did Jim Crow start? But going back to 1866, there was a Civil Rights Act passed that said that black citizens would have the same right to enter into contracts as white citizens. Now, this act became very important back in the 60s, again, because it was sort of taken and used to uh, get rid of private schools. The idea that if I'm a private school and I am a commercial school and I'm advertising and I refuse to let black kids into the private school, that is a violation of the 1866 Rights Act because I'm not into a contract with them. However, how is that case different from this one? In this one, Bubba's not refusing to enter into a contract with anyone. Bubba, you can come in, you can buy stuff in the store, but you might have to come in a different entrance, use a different water fountain, but still you have the right to contract. So therefore, the act does not apply to Bubba either. So, Constitution doesn't apply, 64 Civil Rights Act doesn't apply, 1866 Civil Rights Act doesn't apply, and on a constitutional level and a federal level, that's all there is. So, where do you go now? State law.
State.
You have to look at all the laws of the particular state in which this occurred. If you're in the South, I don't think you're going to find anything that prohibits Bubba from doing what he's doing. Conclusion, what Bubba is doing here is legal. In what year are we now? 2014. Completely legal.
Completely legal. If you have any questions about this particular question, you can always send us an email via the questions for the instructor link.